Joining us now, our first conversation from here on, I guess it's Radio Row. It's still Radio Row here at the NFL Combine. It is our Chiefs writer at The Athletic, Jesse Newell. Your athletic football show debut, I believe.
A little nervous, a little shaky, but we'll get there. Yeah, this is great.
I'm going to shepherd you just fine. We'll be great here. Typically, the Chiefs would not be involved in a conversation like this. Ballard, we've done this. I call him Barnwell every single time I mention his name. Ballard, how many times have we done this? 3 or 4 times, right?
This is my 4th Combine with you, and we've done it every year.
So and the Chiefs have never been one of these teams. Because how could the Chiefs be possibly be one of the most interesting teams of the offseason? They either were in the Super Bowl or just won the Super Bowl seemingly every single year. A little bit of a different story right now.
A lot going on. Yeah, the 6-11 record, which was a shock, obviously, to start with, but a top 10 pick.
Yeah.
I mean, they really worked on that down the end of the stretch of the season to get to that top 10 pick. Had a lot of work to do and got there. But yeah, the first one, I mean, this is the highlight of the offseason, or what you always say is like their first top 10 pick since Patrick Mahomes in 2017.
And even that, they had to trade up to get.
They had to trade up. Like, to get to this point in any other draft, to get to like the 9th pick, they would have to trade like 4 first-round picks. So this is a different opportunity, but like you said, different potential for the Chiefs, and they have to kind of figure out their trajectory from here moving forward. The 6-11 season, we can talk about a little bit fluky, a little bit maybe not quite as bad as it seems on the surface, but with the moves they've made, the free agents they've signed recently, and what they've got to do with their cap, there's a lot to do this offseason.
Yeah, I don't think that the final record is indicative of how bad things actually were. And at the same time, you look at a team like the Eagles, for example. Mm-hmm. When you are one of these mainstay teams, it does actually benefit you to bottom out one year.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Because you know you're going to be relevant every single year. And so getting a top 10 pick, you might as well just have it be as bad as possible. The year where the Chiefs fired Doug Peterson was one of those years. They get Devontae Smith because of that. Like, having one of these overall and like the trajectory of the franchise isn't necessarily a bad thing. At the same time, I want to just talk about last season for like 2 minutes.
Sure.
What do you think, in what was a down year and a disappointing year, are the lessons that the Chiefs should take from the 2025 season, and what are the lessons you think they will take from the 2025 season?
Well, I'm probably more aligned with them than most people, because I think Andy Reid, we know he's going to throw the football. We know that's part of what they do, and you have Patrick Mahomes, you should throw the football, that sort of thing. But the lack of explosives that we saw, I know we've talked a lot, or we've had a lot of discussion about the explosive nature of teams and how you can get these big chunk plays. The Chiefs didn't have that last year. They had a little bit early on. They tried to throw the ball deep, but running back especially, they had one 20-plus yard run from a running back all year. Mahomes had 2. So, like, the quarterback is leading you in that. That is not a good thing. They can't not address this anymore. I think I got a little unlucky last year when it came to the draft. It looked like the 4th-round pick was going to be that. And then if you look at the board that went off on the board on the 4th round before their pick, it was just running back. Caleb Sampson. I mean, there's all these guys, Etienne, all these guys they potentially could have taken, and they sort of struck out. So they can't strike out this year. If they clear some free agency room, you would think that they're going to go get a starting running back just to kind of clear their base needs. It's kind of the biggest thing that they need, I would think, in free agency. But that's the number one thing. Defensively, again, a little bit of a fluky thing, but I think for them, pass rusher, they could not get home at opportune times. And I looked this up on True Media. It was kind of a stat I couldn't believe when I looked at it. But the Chiefs, when you looked at just scenarios, it's a small scenario, but 4th quarter, 3rd downs, 1-score games, they were 35 points worse on defense in those scenarios than they were the year before. They were, I think it was 2nd in the NFL in 2024 in that situation, 32nd in the NFL in 2025. So it's clutch situations. It's those minor details I talk about, but so many times they were so close to getting a sack and couldn't quite get there. So George Karlaftis was hurt part of the year. Chris Jones had a good year, not a great year, but they need more help on the defensive line. I think if you get a little bit more pressure, some of these things go away.
I think on defense, I'm fine with these are our base principles. We just need to be a little bit better personnel-wise.
Yes.
The offense, I think that you can look at this one of 2 ways, and we've kind of taken both views on it as we've talked about this team over the course of the season. What you're saying there is we need better personnel at certain positions. We need a more explosive running back. I think big-bodied receiver is another thing, like on the perimeter, that this team could use, which we can talk about. But I think there are also structural, if not concerns, then considerations for maybe where this team should go from here. I think this offseason, the soft firing of Matt Nagy gives you a chance to potentially pivot to maybe an offensive coordinator from a slightly different background that can incorporate some newer ideas into this offense. Instead, they go back and get Eric Bieniemy.
I was going to say offensive coordinator because it's an Andy Reid offense. Yes.
And so that's the question, is like, how much of this do you think they'll try to solve by just changing out certain elements of the personnel? And how much do you think in the building they believe that maybe it's time for a little bit of self-reflection for the ideas that permeate this offense?
It's a really good question. It's the question of the offseason. I know there's been people out there, and Mitchell Schwartz, former Chiefs guys, talked with you guys just about this whole thing, and he's been very vocal about that as well. I don't think in the building they believe it's huge, monumental changes. I think they think it's tweaks. And then, like I said, talking about some of the close game stuff, they went 1-10 in close games, which we know it's not going to repeat again. What's crazy to me is if you look at the numbers, I did this. Anthony Reinhardt runs Stat Butler online. He has some great data visualizations, and I pulled up for his Chiefs review of the season, and it's crazy if you look at it. Like the orange is the top when it comes to like 80th percentile and higher for offensive EPA, and before they lost both tackles in Week 13, like it's just orange on the offense. So it's crazy because it becomes this sort of revisionist history that like this offense was not good all year, when in fact, Patrick Mahomes was pulling some rabbits out of his hat. We knew he scrambled more early on to kind of take advantage of not having receivers and doing what he could. But like their offense was it was second in EPA after Week 13 in the NFL, like only behind the Colts, who obviously had their same sort of collapse as well. So I think for Andy Reid, and this takes confidence in yourself, he sort of said, I'm sticking with what I do and what I'm good at. Now, is that what they should do? Listen, there's always ideas out there. Like, we know the Rams are going 13 personnel heavy, and they're using tight ends in a creative way. And we know the 49ers succeed in the way that they do. But, like, this is an Andy Reid offense, and this is Andy Reid kind of going out on, the last few years here on his terms. So I don't think there's going to be monumental changes. I don't think that Andy Reid has indicated that there's going to be that. They need fresh ideas. They need new things to kind of study up on. But at the end of the day, like, again, it's such a weird season because I just feel like, I keep using this example, but I feel like the Chiefs last year, they had 11 on blackjack, and we're seeing a 6. And then the dealer gets to 21. Yeah. And then they had 11, and the dealer showed 5. And they double down, and the dealer hits 20. And it's like, man, your strategy is wrong. What are you doing? It's like, well, kinda, but like things just sort of didn't turn out for them, and injuries played a big part in that. So I think they're sticking what they have. I think there's a discussion to be had about more new ideas, especially in the run game. I think the run game could use a refresh and them getting more explosiveness there. But I don't think this is an overhaul. I don't think it's Andy Reid changing what he does because, again, he's comfortable with his own skin. What he's done has worked for a long, long time.
That is my understanding of it as well. And talking to people even over the last 24 hours or so about, because they have some newer faces on the coaching staff that aren't just Eric Bieniemy. I think there's been a little bit of turnover. And so I think that my understanding is that it will be a lot of the same stuff, and that most of this will be driven by changes in personnel. And then the question becomes, what do those changes in personnel look like?
Yes.
So far, we've had already a couple cap moves that the Chiefs have made even before the combine is kicked off. They restructured Mahomes' deal. That saves them about $40 million against the cap. They cut Mike Dana yesterday. That saved them, I think, like 7-ish or so million.
I think it was 8.9.
So right around there. And then that still puts them at $3 million over the cap. And so if they're going to use free agency as a tool to add a couple of these guys, they're still going to need to free up some more money. Where do you think some of that money can come from to maybe get them at like $15-20 million number that they might need to add a couple guys?
Well, I think the first one right off the bat is Juwan Taylor. They can save $20 million with him. And they have Jalen Moore, as they signed a year ago at this time, for a 2-year contract. So he was serviceable when he was healthy in there. And I just think Juwan Taylor can be an elite player, but with the penalties, sort of the history he's had and the ability for them to get out from under that, that's an obvious move to start with. They've got some restructured candidates. Now, which direction they go with those guys is sort of interesting. Like Creed Humphrey is one, George Karlaftis is one. Potentially you can move that money up. And then Chris Jones is another, but he's a player at, starting to be in the 30s where you're like, okay, do you want to space this money out, or is this a guy where you want to leave yourself some flexibility for next year if he has a down year to say, we can potentially move on from you and take the salary cut, or take the salary hit in that particular one and save some of that dead money charge. So kind of fascinating with those guys. And then one we have to talk about, this would not be an issue if they didn't re-sign so many guys lately like Creed Humphrey and Trey Smith and Nick Bolton, but Trent McDuffie. The Trent McDuffie situation is a big one that looms over this season, because if they are not going to sign him to a long-term contract, and if they do, they can obviously save some money there, but if they're not going to, now's the time to trade him. And his value should be pretty high to teams out there. And there's other teams out there kind of like redoing the Tyreek Hill trade from a few years back, where a team will give that guy a max contract and be happy to sign him, happy to have him, and it could fit better under another team's salary cap. So you could save $13 million there potentially if you trade him. And so
how do you think that resolves? Do you think that they have the appetite to give him that sort of long-term deal, or do you think in their minds it might be more attractive to get something for him?
It's a fascinating one, because if there's anybody that's the Chiefs are stars and scrubs. Like
Yeah.
they are top of the market in center, at guard, at quarterback, at kicker, at middle linebacker almost, at Chris Jones. Like they pay their players, and then they fill the rest of the roster with draft picks. The one position they historically have not given extensions to, though, is cornerback. And they have an added advantage of Steve Spagnuolo and the Dave Merritt, their cornerbacks coach. They seem to find these guys.
They really do.
Their top free agent right now going into this offseason is Jalen Watson, who a 7th-round pick, they developed through their system, and now he's an outside corner who could play for anybody.
How many times has that happened? Where you have these guys drafted in the 4th round or later by these teams, or a guy like Charvarius Ward who was undrafted, I believe, right?
Yep.
And so now you have all of these guys that were day 3 or later picks making upwards of $15 million or more a year in free agency. It's happened. This will be the 3rd time in the last 5 years this has happened, right?
And then L'Jarius Sneed is another one they traded.
Ward and him.
Yeah. And they don't. It almost feels like if you have the ability at a position to turn straw into gold, you just go back to Spags and say,
understand
straw
that.
to gold, buddy. Like it's time. And not to mention, Steve is really good too at finding the Chris Roland Wallaces of the world who are these undrafted free agents. And then all of a sudden they're in the rotation and they're playing slot for you, playing a little bit of safety, and they're fitting in and they're not. It's not a huge drop off. So, I mean, you don't want to put too much on Spags' plate, obviously, but he seems to have this ability along with Dave Merritt, who develops corners great, probably a future defensive coordinator at some point. Dave Merritt, the Chiefs cornerbacks coach, defensive backs coach, he's really well respected, but they seem to have a factory there to be doing that. So they love Trent. I mean, Trent McDuffie is 10 out of 10 on the field, 10 out of 10 off the field. The only thing he doesn't have is the ideal size and ball skills, but everything else, on field, off field, what you want from a leader, amazing. So, I was even talking with guys last night, the Rams at 29, they have a couple first-round draft picks. They have some cap space. If you're the Rams, you offer the Chiefs 29 for McDuffie. I mean, that seems to make sense to me for both sides. And then the Chiefs can address some of these needs that they have in the offseason because they have limited free agent dollars, but they're going to have to address their roster in some way. A late first-round pick would do wonders for them in that particular regard.
And if you look at it, they probably can figure out a workable secondary without him based on the guys they currently have on the roster. Noah Williams flashed a little bit last year as an outside corner. They still have Christian Fulton. They've got a couple options in the slot. You mentioned Chris Wallace when they were a little bit smaller. He was in there last year, but Jamari Connor has played in there a ton.
Absolutely.
That makes safety a need rather than corner. And so there's a lot of moving parts, but you can imagine a world without him. And I think a couple of years ago, it kind of would have been crazy to think that. He seemed like an ascending. He still was a great player, Trent McDuffie, but it seemed like he was an ascending all-pro, unbelievably valuable. There's no way we're ever letting him leave the building sort of player. And I think that has shifted a little bit.
Yes, absolutely. And listen, the Chiefs, ideally, what he plays is slot corner because he's a great blitzer, and it allows him to play.
But they don't have him do that anymore.
They wanted, ideally, they signed Christian Fulton last offseason, put him outside, put Jalen Watson outside, let Trent McDuffie be that chess piece in the middle, and just weaponize him in that way. And then Christian Fulton was hurt, never got caught up with the playbook, and then it just never materialized. You know what I mean? So that's the tough part about this. But like I said, I think the good thing for another team like the Rams or whoever is it's sometimes you're trading for a player and you're like, I wonder what they know about him that I don't know. What's going on off the field? And that's just not it with Trent McDuffie. It's obvious. It's their cap space and it's their potential to be able to turn these guys around and not always have to have first round draft picks, produce for them in the secondary. So I think it makes a lot of sense for the Chiefs. Will they do it or not? I don't know, because they give extensions to so many of their own guys. Maybe they make a way to make it work with Trent McDuffie because of all that he means for them. But it is a complicated one. And at The Athletic, we had written about the Ravens, the Bengals, and the Chiefs. What can you do to restart, jumpstart, get yourself back into NFL contention, Super Bowl contention? And that was the one I said for the Chiefs. It was very tough for them after they lost to the Bengals in the AFC Championship game a few years back to trade Tyreek Hill, but it felt like kind of a moment where you could do it and feel like this was sort of the change to something else. And it would be kind of funny because the Tyreek Hill trade helped bring back Trent McDuffie. Now, the Trent McDuffie trade could potentially help bring back somebody else that starts them on their next run.
So let's say, hypothetically, they cut Juaun Taylor. Let's say they move on from Trent McDuffie. We're looking at $25 to $30-ish million in cap space at that point. You mentioned running back. Do you feel like, because I think everybody wants to drop a Breece Hall onto this team or a Kenneth Walker onto this team to really give them as much juice as possible at that position. Do you think there is a world where they get that aggressive and when it comes to the top of the running back market in free agency, or do you think ultimately the direction they go is more modest than that?
I think probably more modest than that. And the good thing for them is that the running back depth in free agency is just
it's
crazy.
It's really good. Yeah.
I mean, Travis Etienne for them, like he would be a god in Kansas City right now. It doesn't
so
have
true.
to be Breece Hall.
All that matters is not Kareem Hunt. That's all that matters. For some fan bases, you would need a guy like a Breece Hall to get people excited. In
this
Kansas
guy would get a key to the city. He would get a key to the city. Like this guy is the best running back they've seen. And listen, I mean, I want to caveat, like Isaiah Pacheco, the injuries just caught up to him. He had 2 fine first years, you know what I mean? And you can win Super Bowls. I think the Chiefs, if we go down their starting running back and all these Super Bowls they've won, like who's the best one? I mean,
one of the biggest mistakes of this regime is chasing a running back unnecessarily.
Which is also, we have to mention that when we talk about the first round with the Chiefs. Like there is history of them taking a running back in the first round and it completely blowing up on them. Like one of the worst moves I think they would admit that they've made. So you can't ignore that history when we're talking about the Jeremiyah Love thing. But knowing their needs and what they have, I think Brett Veach, the Chiefs GM, what he loves to do in the offseason, he loves to base cover his needs so he doesn't go into the draft saying, I'm painted in a corner. I have to take this position. I think it's a really wise, good way to bring about value. The Chiefs have also, since Clyde Edwards-Helaire, valued premium positions early. And we understand the math on this because I just told you, like, what is Travis Etienne going to cost you if you get him in free agency? What is that cost going to be compared to, like, if you draft Jeremiyah Love and immediately his 4-year contract is $32 million guaranteed? Like, why not sign Etienne to that and then get yourself a free first-round pick who potentially can bring surplus value at edge rusher, at tackle, at receiver, whatever the case may be. So I think it makes sense for the Chiefs somewhere in the Etienne aisle where it would be good for them. It would be a huge upgrade. Fans would be excited, and it's still probably not shopping at the Breece Hall, top of the market, designer fashion, potential mall that needed. And that would still be an upgrade for them, and it would still bring about explosiveness, which is what they need from that run.
Yeah, I think that the running back economics, you laid them out perfectly. It's like there's real opportunity cost for taking a running back in the top 10. And even if we think that Jeremiyah Love is a fantastic prospect, we've never seen him play football in the NFL. So giving a guy like a Travis Etienne, who maybe has a lower ceiling, but there's absolutely some more certainty there because we know what he can be in the league, I think that's a trade-off that you might be willing to make because it gives you other opportunities and pathways with that 9th overall pick. You mentioned this team still needs a pass rusher. Like there are a bunch of needs at premium positions or enough needs at premium positions where filling the running back in free agency and then using the draft, have a little bit more flexibility, I think is the right mindset.
Real quick, a year ago, like to the day when we talked to Brett Veach this day, it was so interesting because we were talking about left tackle. How are they going to fix left tackle? They never get a top pick. How are they going to fix left tackle? And he said, I brought it up with Andy Reid, Chiefs coach. He's like, I know exactly how to fix this. Suck for a year, get a top 5 pick, get a left tackle. Like they've never had this opportunity. So anyway, they get Josh Simmons, and when healthy, when in, he was good. But like this is the sort of opportunity the Chiefs never get. And so it was hard for me to see them getting a top 10 pick, first time since 2017, and taking a safety, taking a running back. It'd be like they never get the crack at the starting right tackle for the next 5 years or the receiver that is the next whoever, that's the top of the market instead of trading up in the second round because you see something you think in Rashee Rice that other teams don't see. So they've played this well again since Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I'd expect them to do it again because this is the type of edge rusher, offensive tackle, wide receiver they never get to scout and then take without trading up and using multiple first-round picks. So I would look for them to take in one of those positions because they understand the value of surplus value, especially with the team that is at the end of the first round every single year. So we could talk through some of these guys, but I would expect those 3 positions most likely. And if they can secure that for the long-term future, then that's going to help them out, for years to come.
In terms of free agent money, I think running back does make sense. And the other spot that, we've talked about a bunch is just like a big-bodied perimeter receiver on this team that they have not had in a long time. Because even if Rashee Rice is a bigger receiver, that's not how he's used, right? Like he's an inside guy, he's a space player, and he's been very good and productive in that role when he's been asked to do it. But they've really missed somebody that it's 3rd and 7. We're playing against a team that plays a decent amount of man coverage and plays it well. Is there somebody we can go to? And it's funny because the guy I kept coming back to when we were discussing kind of just the hypothetical archetype for who could fill something like that was always Juaun Jennings. I was like, they need a Juaun Jennings type receiver within their offense. Juaun Jennings is a free agent. Like they could just get Juaun Jennings if they wanted to.
Go take the Juaun Jennings.
But that archetype of player, do you think that's a fair Do you think that thought is fair? That like that is a type of guy within this offense that could maybe bridge the gap of, even if we're not going to change a lot schematically, this is going to allow us to kind of overcome a weakness that's crept in over the last couple of years.
So a couple of years ago, I did a story about the Chiefs' type at receiver, and you're right. The type for them at receiver is short, fast,
if you listen to the show, you understand how it drives Derrik insane every single year.
But it is like playing the video game on hard mode. Like, you can vary this, Like, you can have one guy in the red zone who can come down with a contested catch. Historically, Patrick Mahomes has not been a contested catch sort of thrower. He did more last year and said one of his kind of goals was to trust his guys. And so you've seen that more. Man coverage was a huge issue last year, them beating man coverage. So absolutely, you could see that. But as far as like base level needs go, the question becomes draft or free agency. And if you look at the Chiefs, like Rashee Rice just had more off-field stuff pop up in the offseason.
What do you think happens with that?
All I can tell you is the Chiefs love him on the field. I mean, they love his skill set, yards per route run, all these metrics show, and he's so good after the catch. They always talk about how he's a running back after the catch, and they love his skill set there, but to bring him back on another contract, you would really have to have a conversation with the owner and say, I'm vouching for this guy. And right now, that's a tough conversation to have in the last year of his deal. So I don't know. I know the Chiefs love him on the field, but can he be trusted off of it? I think that's a legitimate question. And if they do, that'll be a press conference that, some questions will be asked for sure.
Other areas of need when you look at free agency, Bryan Cook is a free agent. And so safety seems to be a spot where they would need another body heading into this year. It's a year, and you mentioned running back. It's a couple of the needs for the Chiefs in free agency are the spots where there are a lot of options, right? Like there's a lot of, what's the word I'm looking for? There's a lot of supply at safety in free agency this year. And so that's a spot where I could see them signing a guy to maybe like a mid-level contract to find a starter. Any other like needs positionally that are at front of mind for you with this team?
Again, I'm kind of combining the draft with it, but when you talk defensive line, they've got to get out of their rut of like re-signing 34-year-old dudes on the defensive interior. And when you talk Bryan Cook, it's a really good point you made, because I was even looking up True Media yesterday, and like when he's on the field and when he's off the field, how teams had like 1.1 yards per rush more when he was off the field. There was the Cowboys game, if you remember, he went out with an injury, and then like 5 plays later, the Cowboys hit on a huge run. And it's like, this is not a coincidence. Bryan Cook's big skill down this particular year especially was he got guys on the ground. So he was he's
a fantastic tackler in space.
He was making up for a bunch of the deficiencies the Chiefs had on their defensive line. And, Chris Jones is great rushing the passer. He's not great in the run game, but whoever has been next to him, it has not been good. And I know Omar Norman a lot. He's kind of been a pass rusher guy. He got hurt last year, so he'll be back. But they could really use just probably in the draft they never seem to dart throw this, but they need a younger guy who can be a run stopper to get out of the Derrik, Nagy, Mike Pennell endless cycle of guys that just haven't been working out as a veteran. So I could see them, especially like a later round draft pick or even a mid-level draft pick, doing that, or if they find somebody in free agency potentially. But I think we hit on them, running back, receiver. The question to me in the draft is like, if one of these tackles, if you think they're going to still be a tackle, falls to them, if they just, like we talked about last year with Bear Beach, like they never get the swing at the top tackle in the draft. What if you could set and secure your offensive line for Patrick Mahomes for like 3 to 4 years with Simmons, Suamataia, Humphrey, Trey Smith, and then Mauingoa or whoever, Fano or whatever on the right side. So I think that would be an enticing thing. But I think their base needs, if they're going to get them mostly covered, I'd look defensive line, I would look running back, and then receiver at some point. But probably not as far away as some people would think based off a 6-11 record, but still so much to do with not as much cap space as previous years.
A different sort of feel to this Chiefs offseason. I am looking forward to the parade that they are going to throw when they sign Travis Etienne in free agency. Jesse Newell, great to get you on the show, my friend. Appreciate the time. We'll talk to you very soon.
Hey, I appreciate it.
Joining us now from Radio Row here in Indianapolis, it is our Vikings writer at The Athletic, Alec Lewis. How you doing, buddy?
I'm great, Robert. Good to be here. I've looked forward to this week for a couple weeks now. I can't wait to go through it and see where things are with this organization that happens to be in a very, very interesting spot.
I don't even know where to start this conversation.
Wherever you want to start.
I think let's just start with the practical realities of what the next month or two might look like for the Vikings. This is probably the most boring place to start, but it's where my notes begin, and why not? Okay. The Vikings are $43 million over the cap as things currently stand. They need a quarterback. They have other needs. How does the money get handled in your mind to give them a little bit of flexibility heading into the year?
Yeah, I think the cap and them being $43 million over the cap, on paper, it doesn't look great. But if you look at the amount of levers they have to pull to create space and create room, there are a bunch of them. You could restructure Justin Jefferson's contract, Jonathan Grenard's contract, Andrew Van Ginkel, Byron Murphy, Will Fry. Some of these guys you'd want to do that. Some of these guys you wouldn't. But there are a lot of levers from just the restructure component of it. And then there are going to be some interesting conversations on players like Aaron Jones, Javon Hargrave, potentially Jonathan Allen, Ryan Kelly as potential cuts. And then there's also extension conversations for a guy like right tackle Brian O'Neill. So a lot of ways for them to get above the cap. But you're right. You got to talk about the quarterback need. You've got to talk about if you were to cut Aaron Jones, then you need a running back.
Well, that's the problem with this, is that you can do all of these things, and you can move on from a bunch of these guys. But then, if you're the Vikings, it kind of puts you back in the exact same position you were in last spring, and then now you have no money to go out and find other players at those positions.
It's exactly right. Fortunately, different than last year when they had 4 picks in the draft. They have projected to be 9 this year. So that is helpful. 4 of them are supposed to be in the top 100. A critical component to add youth to a roster that's just getting older and older year by year. And like, that's really there are a lot of things fascinating about this team, but really one of the primary components that makes them so interesting is you're trying to really straddle like this quarterback development world with this veteran aging roster win now coaches that squeeze everything out of the roster world, and doing that at the same time. You could spin it in one way, and we did prior to last season, as like you buoy the young quarterback at the highest level. But you could also spin it the other way of that adds a lot of pressure to the quarterback and forces him to be ready at a certain time. And you never really know on the continuum development when that time's going to be. So
that's part of my concern and my issue with the approach to the team build last year, is that the needle that you were trying to thread became extremely small based on those two competing timelines. If you're going to be signing these guys who are 32, 33-year-old players, I mean, the best case scenario is you have them through 2027 and you have to compete for 2027. But with the age of some of those guys, the Hargraves and the Allens, your hope would be you're competitive in 2026. And that means the quarterback immediately has to get you in a place where you're competitive. That did not happen. And so now we're in a place where there's a huge quarterback question with this team. And just to be clear, and I've said this a bunch of different times, but I think still people are still missing it. The idea that you would give up on JJ McCarthy after last year is crazy if you think about the quarterback landscape over the last several seasons and how many guys we've seen break out a little bit later. I don't think JJ McCarthy is some lost cause, even if last year was disappointing. At the same time, if you were the Minnesota Vikings, with the considerations of the age of the rest of the roster, but also everyone in that building, I don't think you can walk into this year and say, well, we're just going to hope that JJ figures it out. I would be shocked if that was the approach, and I just don't think it will be at that position.
Yeah, I'm glad you clarify that and say it that way. Like, Vikings fans are very passionate about wanting JJ to have as much time as possible, as they should be. This is the first time they drafted a quarterback in the top 10. They drafted him 10th. He got hurt his first year, missed it with a torn meniscus. Then he played in 10 games last year with a handful of injuries, but there were flashes. Like, I think that's the one.
This is literally the team that employed Sam Darnold.
Exactly.
This is the team that did it.
Like, and I laugh all the time because there's so many different ways to look at it. One way that people often talk about is like, look at Sam's arc, but Sam's arc happened 6 years in his career. The Vikings right now can't afford to wait 4 more years because you have a head coach in Kevin O'Connell who will be entering his 5th season without having won a playoff game, underneath an ownership and an organization that wants to be in it every single year. So
just fire the general manager, which even if there's a lot that goes into that, I do think that it increases the urgency across the rest of the building.
No question. But your point is correct. Like, the Vikings have been very forward since the season ended. They want, at a bare minimum, competition for JJ McCarthy. It leads you into the question, though, can you get the requisite quarterback insurance and build the quarterback room the way you want to build it, unless you're guaranteeing that potential free agent or trade a certain amount of role or guaranteed position? And
that's how you lost out on Daniel Jones last year.
Exactly. And Daniel Jones, like, that situation, I'll just clear it as best as I can. everybody in the building wanted to bring back Daniel Jones. They were willing to offer him as much, if not more, than Indianapolis. They had him in the building, and they believed that because he was exposed to their system and their culture, he would return. That was a little bit of a miscalculation because of the circumstance he chose in Indianapolis, but him choosing Indianapolis really set the table for the lack of insurance they had at quarterback throughout the season. And so any repeat of that process would be a disastrous look and circumstance for a team that just can't afford it right now.
So how aggressive do you think the quarterback solution ends up being? Because I think that you can do it on a bunch of different levels. You can bring in somebody that is a veteran that's like, okay, he's here for support and maybe a little bit of competition, or you could bring in somebody that is clearly a tier above a guy like JJ McCarthy, and it's like, no, based on the investment we're putting in this guy, he's going to be the starter. So across that spectrum of possible solutions, where do you think the Vikings ultimately land with how they build out that room?
I would say the most likely outcome to me right now is the veteran who can add competition, who you would trust if they were thrust in the game. Because, like, if you look at
that's a pretty tepid solution.
It is a tepid solution, no question. But I think part of it is if you were to replace JJ McCarthy at this point, you would need a solution that you would feel great about for multiple seasons. And I'm not sure if one exists. Now, you can have the conversation about like a Kyler Murray. Could he, in this system with this infrastructure and this staff and these skill players, maximize who he is? Like, I think there's an argument to be made there. There's an argument to be made if you trade a second-round pick for Mac Jones, he steps in. He's had success with Josh McDaniels in the past, who is close with Kevin, and there's some crossover in the system. Like, that is a valid and viable circumstance too. But you would really be declaring at that point the JJ McCarthy experiment be totally put on the back burner, and that is a drastic declaration. Now, if there were like a CJ Stroud option out there, then you might be more inclined to go that path. It's just hard to believe that a team like that or a team like Cincinnati would move off the quarterbacks they have at the positions that they're in.
This is so interesting because there's so many different considerations with this. One, I think that by doing the half measure solution, you potentially solve nothing, right? And I think that to me feels like the most likely outcome if you're going to go the veteran route. But I also understand not wanting to show everyone you're giving up on JJ now. But I think that still might be the best approach for where this team is at this moment. It's hard to eat that, but at the same time, I still think it might be the right thing to do where, all right, Mac Jones is the starter. Whatever that says about JJ doesn't really matter. We need to make sure that we're winning games. Like, I still think in my soul that might be the better approach.
No question. But then the argument to that is, so you get a Mac Jones, you're winning games, but like,
to what end?
Yeah, what end?
Yeah.
And
I understand that.
And the whole purpose and direction of going this path that they've gone down with JJ McCarthy has been to get to the place that they've never been able to get to. But my spin in many ways has been, regardless of what they do here, whether it's the tepid solution or the full-time solution, what should be the focus is, let's maximize the defense to no end, and let's maximize the run game to no end. And that way the floor is where it is regardless of the circumstance. I don't know, again, how far that ultimately gets you, but I think some of their decisions thus far have shown you that is probably part of the path that they're going to take regardless.
Just a couple things, a couple notes about the quarterback stuff. We talked about this 2 weeks ago when we were still doing shows. I had not thought a lot about the prices in the market, and I was pretty wrong about them after talking to people in the league. Like, you mentioned a day 2 pick for Mac Jones. Because of how cheap the contract is, it does seem like that's about where it would land, like a day 2 pick and change for somebody like Mac Jones. And with Kyler, in talking to people about that, I didn't really realize how much of the 2027 deal became guaranteed, like in the next couple of weeks or so.
$20 million?
It's like 20-ish million. And so I think that in a vacuum would probably scare off enough teams where he would be released. The problem with that is, because the market is so dry other than Kyler Murray, I think there's still a potential chance a team gives up a pick, even if it's a late round pick, because there just aren't many other options available. And so those were not the values we were discussing a couple weeks ago. I have reset and level set on those and have a better understanding of them now. So I'd like to apologize about that.
I think too, like you hear the names of like a Geno Smith, and can you imagine him throwing the ball down the field in this offense? I mean,
that was going to be my next question for you. If it is the veteran option who is coming in to give competition, what does that ultimately look like? Because I think the two names that would come to mind for me, if Geno is released, I'd be curious to see what Geno could do within this offense. But also, Kirk Cousins got released about 10 minutes before we started recording this. So those are probably the two names that come to mind for me.
Yeah, I mean, the Kirk Cousins one is a no-brainer in a lot of respects. Like, I don't know if you've gone back and watched the tape from the last 4 games that he won with the Falcons or what have you, but it wasn't Kirk in what he was in 2023 before the Achilles, but it was viable. He was going through progressions. He was throwing the ball downfield. It seemed like he had such command of that offense. And his relationship is still good with Kevin O'Connell. He loved Minnesota. His family loves Minnesota. So depending on what the market is for him, I see that as viable for sure. The Geno one, less certain for me, but to your point, the idea of him airing it out 25 yards down the field to jump ball situations to Justin Jefferson is easy to imagine a world where you could produce the way that Sam Darnold did in many ways in this offense. And if you get that level of quarterback play and the defense is where it is and the run game's even more improved and the offensive line is healthy and better, like there is a path to being a double-digit win team, and then you see from there. But yeah, if it's the more tepid strategy, Kirk Cousins, Geno Smith, that's where my mind goes for sure.
The Geno thing is just compelling to me on so many different levels. I have to choose to believe that there is a version of Geno still out there that would look better than he did last year. You have to come to terms, he was bad last year. He was really bad last year in a terrible circumstance. So there's a lot going on there. The other part of it is, imagine the closing of the Sam Darnold, Geno Smith circle if Geno went to Minnesota and played well next year for the Vikings.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned Geno. Like, I went back and watched the tape over the last couple of weeks, and there was a game against Chicago where Kevin Ballard had 2 picks on dagger that he just like stepping right in. I'm like, why does he keep throwing this? Kevin Ballard is right there. So it was
a bad year.
Yeah, it was.
But it was a terrible situation. And so it's hard to, like, how much of it is that? Like, if you put him back into a different situation, does he play better? I have no idea.
Right.
I have to choose to believe that there is still a version of Geno Smith left out there that can play better than he did last year.
You said this, but it would be a fascinating experiment of, like, you pluck a guy from this place, you put him in this quarterback environment, now you put him in this one, what does it look like? I mean, that's definitely going to be interesting. And I haven't been surprised because the Vikings still went 9-8 and the culture is still where it is. But talking to people in the league, like, this opportunity in this position is still a really coveted position from all of these guys. Like, to get in the Vikings organization with Kevin O'Connell, with Justin Jefferson, is still a really valuable thing viewed by agents and teams in the league. It's more a question of how committed are they still to JJ McCarthy. That's what you get a lot of when you talk to people, and it's a little murky in that, just in where they are with that.
We don't have to rehash the Kwesi stuff in terms of why it happened. The question I have for you is, as we sit on kind of the precipice of free agency and the draft here, how do you think the Vikings' approach in roster building over the next 2 months will be different because Kwesi isn't there, and now I assume Kevin O'Connell is going to have a larger voice in, like, how some of this stuff is shaped?
Yeah, I imagine Kevin O'Connell and Brian Flores will have major personnel influence, but Rob Brzezinski, who is the interim right now, it's easy to, like, overlook who he is and what he's done.
He's been there for like 30 years.
He's been with the Vikings since 1999 when I was 2 years old. He has negotiated as the primary negotiator for this team and managed the cap for 20 plus years. So regardless, he would be here having a key role in who they sign. I would say, as far as their strategy and approach, especially because they haven't won a playoff game in 4 years, like, I would not, and because the roster is older and because Justin Jefferson is in the prime of his career.
And has been vocal about how shitty last year was.
Yeah, and he managed it as well as any superstar possibly could, but it was an agonizingly difficult situation for everybody. And you could feel the stress, the tension coming out of training camp. I remember being in Dublin and being in London week 4 and week 5, and it was tough. And so the fact they ended up 9-8 was kind of crazy in itself, but if they make decisions for 2026 and 2027 with short-term perspective, it'll make more sense to me now than it did last year when they took a similar approach.
We know the quarterback situation. You talk about if they move on from Aaron Jones, what does running back look like, interior defensive line? What are the other areas of need in your mind for this team that maybe we're not thinking enough about?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, if Harrison Smith retires, then who is playing safety for a Brian Flores defense where the communication runs through that position? So you start there. They absolutely need cornerback depth. Byron Murphy Jr. and Isaiah Rodgers have provided a certain floor on the outside, but to revamp that position with more explosiveness and athleticism is huge. And then TJ Hockenson, I don't know if we talked about, his cap number right now is $21 million. That is the highest cap number of all tight ends in the NFL currently. His production has not, in recent years, since he's come back from the ACL, it has not matched that cap number. So where do the Vikings view him in his performance and his arc? If they negotiate a pay cut, how willing is he going to be to do that? So that's another big spot. There's just a lot of them. Interior defensive line. I mean, Eric Wilson, what if he leaves in free agency, then linebacker? It's all over the map. It's all over the board. And I expect to be very busy like it always seems to be in Minnesota.
Yeah, that's part of the problem here. Like we mentioned at the top, it's that you have the quarterback thing that's just looming over everything else. But then when you dig a layer or two deeper, you realize like, man, there's still a lot of considerations and needs on this team. And a lot of the considerations and needs on this team happen to align with where they invested resources last year. And that's just a frustrating place to be.
And then we haven't even talked about like Christian Darrisaw. In my opinion, it was one of the more underrated storylines the entire season. He comes back from his torn ACL and he plays a little bit. He pulls himself out of games. It's like, is he playing? If he's playing, how long is he playing? And so, where is he entering? He's a massive, huge aspect of the offensive line. Where is he? And then again, if you're replacing Ryan Kelly, the center position for an offense that's as complex as the Vikings is going to be massive, yet you're dealing with the cap number that you're dealing with. So, yeah, they're beyond the quarterback. There is a ton to sort through. And I've told people, besides the quarterback pursuit in 2024, since I've covered the team, this is definitely the most meaningful time, I think, for the direction of this organization.
And that is why they are one of the most interesting teams of the 2026 offseason. Alec Lewis, always great to chat with you, buddy. We will do it again very soon.
Thanks, Robert. Appreciate you.
Joining us now, it is our Indianapolis Colts writer here at The Athletic, James Boyd. James, great to see you, man.
I'm doing good, man. Great to see you as well. And sleeping in my own bed, so I can't relate to everyone else. Everyone always asks me, like, oh, where are you going at this? Where are you staying after this? And I'm like, I'm staying at home. So
yeah, that was always that. We're talking to Kiefer about that. It's like trying to balance being social because everyone is here with the idea that, like, your kids are still at home is a tough thing to do when it's happening in your hometown. Let's talk about the Colts. There's a bunch of different stuff to go through here. I want to look back before we look forward because I've asked this question to a bunch of different people who have written about this team and been around this team, and I've gotten a bunch of different answers. But why, in your mind, after the bottoming out in the back half of last year, do you think that Charvarius Ward and the organization was willing to bring Chris Ballard and Shane Steichen back for another run at this thing?
That was the money question, Robert. That was the question all the fans were asking after the end of the game, at the end of season press conference. And ultimately, talking to Charvarius Ward, it sounded like they viewed those first 10 games of the year when they were 8-2 more than the last, now going on 10 years of his entire tenure. Because we were asking her, how do you weigh such a unique season where you were, in Ballard's words, the top 4 team in the NFL when you were 8-2 versus, okay, well, you didn't win another game after that, largely due to injuries, but on top of that, your resume overall, like, have you earned the grace to get another chance? Like, if this was, for example, the 49ers, they've had injury history, they've had things happen, but they've also won. You haven't won anything, and so that, to me, was the hard, like, needle of the thread, but at the same time, Charvarius Ward said, like, well, we believe this team is good. We believe Daniel Jones is a big part of that, and ultimately, it sounded like they evaluated this season on the first 10 games versus, again, the overall 10 years and the last 7 games of the year.
To me, it makes sense in this regard. If you look at, like, this head coaching cycle, it's bleak out there. Like there are not that many guys in this cycle. You wouldn't have wanted to be in this cycle if you were the Colts. The idea that you could hire a head coach that was better than Shane Steichen in this cycle, I think would be misguided. I don't think that would be available to you based on what Shane has done as a play caller and what the offense has looked like. If you keep Shane and fire Chris, that also feels counterproductive in what becomes a shorter window. It's like, all right, so now you're going to completely turn over the front office when you're trying to win now. I think landing in a place where you say, listen, this year, your feet are against the fire. Like this is, we need to win this season with those two guys together, and then we'll reevaluate it after 2026. That does make sense to me, even if I assume some Colts fans are frustrated by the process.
Oh, some. I would say pretty much all of them are fed up just because of mediocrity. But yeah, I think you laid it out pretty well there, Robert. Like a lot of the angst is not towards Shane Steichen, even though a little bit of it is, hey, he's 2-9 against the Texans and the Jaguars during his tenure, which is something you can be critical about. But I think most fans are like, you know what? You haven't had your starting quarterback make it through an entire season through your first 3 years here. We can understand that. But for Ballard, it's like, again, how much grace are we giving this guy who has not won? And I call it the 2-1-0 method. 2 playoff appearances, 1 playoff win, 0 AFC South titles. And then you look at this division, this is not the Chiefs division when Patrick Mahomes and them were on top of the world. This is not with the, dynastic Patriots of old. Like, this division pretty much is open every year, and you're not able to win it. And so that's where a lot of the frustration lies. And ultimately, I was trying to explain this, here in the city, and people are telling me to shut up. It's like, I know why you want them to leave, but here's why they won't leave. And I think that they view them kind of as a joint package, and they don't want to disrupt that, quite frankly.
What do we think happens at quarterback? Obviously, Daniel Jones is a free agent. There's huge questions around Anthony Richardson. When you think about the final plan with that room specifically and what it's going to look like 2 months from now, what does the composition in your mind look like for the Colts?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, number one, I think Daniel Jones is your QB1 going into 2026, and that's basically been solidified, at least on the Colts. And talking to Chris Ballard at the end of the season, he was, I would say, more pushy on him not only being healthy enough to play, but being back here. He called Daniel Jones the team's short and long-term answer, which raised my eyebrows. I was like, long-term,
well, when you trade away 2 first-round picks, you box yourself into a certain position.
Exactly, but at the same time, that frustration again arises among the fan base. We were like, he's saying this now, but this was said through the trade. This was said through the moves. They hitched their wagon to this guy. And I remember writing at the time, Robert, they were 8-3. They had actually a really bad game in Pittsburgh. They made a trade for Sauce Gardner, and I was thinking to myself, and I wrote it, this was your last exit ramp to not go all in, to still have an out for the Daniel Jones experience. And you went all in on this guy. And now, even though he's coming off of a broken leg and a torn Achilles, he probably has more leverage in the negotiations for his new contract than the Colts do, which is a crazy proposition. But then on top of that, I think he's QB1. And then what was interesting, Robert, is Chris Ballard has been Anthony Richardson's biggest champion here in Indianapolis, even when things were going horrible. And at the end of the season, hey, does he have a future here? He says, well, we got to see what's going on with his eye. We'll see what all that brings. And I was like, this is your first chance to basically reaffirm that he's your guy and he'll be here as a future here. And you're singing a different tone than you had at the beginning of the season. So I think that Anthony, quite honestly, will probably get traded. I honestly think that he might want to get traded at this point, get a fresh start. And they're even saying that they're pretty high on Riley Leonard as QB2. And Chris Ballard said at the end of the year, Robert, hey, if Anthony's not right, we like what we saw from Riley. If he could be our QB2. So saying that out loud just lets me know it's probably time to move on from Anthony. And I would myself look at perhaps even drafting a young quarterback to be that third guy if Anthony's not here.
Looking at it right now, the financials of it, the Colts are $35 million in cap space. Functionally, it's probably closer to 27, 28, right? There are certain moves and certain considerations that we're going to have to talk about and think about here. How do you think they figure out the receivers specifically? Because you got a $29 million cap hit for Michael Pittman, who has been a productive player for you, but that's a really big number.
It is.
They would save $20 million if they were to move on from him via cutting him or via trade. And then you have Alec Pierce hitting free agency. And I think that it's really easy to make the argument that right now you would rather have Alec Pierce or whatever his number is going to be than Michael Pittman on a $29 million cap hit. So how do you think that gets solved?
Absolutely. I think, one, they might, and they probably should tag Alec Pierce, because if he hits the open market, boy, the number is going to get high. Especially this year, Robert, I'm sure you've elaborated here on the show. the wide receiver free agent market isn't all that great this year.
It's bad. It's consistently bad pretty much every single year now.
Exactly. So if he reaches that, I mean, I get people are telling me now, like, is he a true number one receiver? It doesn't matter. It's what the league was willing to pay you. That number's going to get pricey. And so to perhaps absorb some of that cost, yes, I think Michael Pittman Jr. would be the guy on the cutting block. And he actually admitted it. I love his candor because right after the season ended, literally in the locker room in Houston, he goes, yeah, if this was my last game as a Colt, I loved it here. Because he knows that's a big number himself. Yeah. And my thinking is, could they restructure? The Colts haven't done a lot of that in years past. They did it last year with Braden Smith. Would he be willing to do that? I mean, he has a farm here. His family's here. He is not really the diva receiver. I mean, the guy's from California and has a farm and loves, horses and cows and stuff like that. And so that's great. But again, and my thing is, he's not worth that much money, but he's still a good player that he's worth something. So can you restructure to half of that? Can you restructure to something in that range? And then I think your palate, feels a little bit better about bringing him back. So, but I've said it, multiple times, Robert, if they do not bring Pittman back, then suddenly receiver becomes a big need, even if you do keep Alec Pierce in tow.
So let's just say hypothetically, Pierce is on the roster for next year. You still have Josh Downs. They figure out receiver somewhere in the draft. They draft a guy. Daniel Jones is back. The next big consideration on the offense, you mentioned him. Braden Smith is hitting free agency. So what they've been able to do over the last couple of years, and it looked a lot better in the first half of the year than the back half of the year.
Yeah.
This plan along the offensive line where we have young players in the pipeline that we're drafting in the middle rounds, those are going to be our solutions. With Gonsalves and with Bortolini, I think that looked pretty darn good for most of last year. They have Jalen Travis, who they drafted in the 4th round last season. Do you just assume that they put Jalen Travis just steps in for Braden Smith if he is to move on? Do you think that's the plan?
I do think that is their plan, and they had kind of been banking on that. And I do want to say for Braden Smith, he's been through a lot the last couple of years. He had the OCD that he kind of got through, and he's in a better place with that now. And then this past year, his production as a player was still pretty good. It's just he got a little dinged up at the end of the season, had a concussion, had a neck injury. And so you're starting to think, okay, how healthy are you going to be? He's still managing he was pretty candid about how he has a knee, not like an injury. He's healthy enough to play, but it's something he has to manage for the rest of his career. And I think the Colts have done a pretty good job in years past. You look at a guy like Ryan Kelly of backfilling and kind of preparing these guys to come along and be ready to go. And I have to give credit to Tony Sparano Jr. as well. I think that he's one of the better offensive line coaches in the league.
They become one of those teams where they really do maximize the players that they bring through. You can skimp on it resource-wise in some ways that other teams can't because you have a development plan. It is like a real weapon that they've been able to wield at that position specifically.
And they don't, again, you talk about building a roster. Every roster is going to have some flaws in it, but where can you, again, you talk about money, that's where they can get a little bit cheaper, get younger. And Jalen Travis, they're very high on him, very smart dude. I want to say he had an internship with Congress, before he came over to the NFL, and he wants to go into politics perhaps afterwards. And I'm like, you are one of God's favorites. Like, how are you this tall, this handsome, and now you want to play football and then do this on the side? So jokes aside, though, they do believe that he, I think, is the future at that right tackle spot. And it wouldn't surprise me if he gets that day one starting role going into next year.
File this under things that might only be interesting to me. But if he is the starting right tackle for the Colts, in terms of composition and where they found the players, it becomes the most interesting offensive line in the league. You have a 3rd round pick at left tackle. The amount of 3rd round picks that hit at left tackle is minuscule, but Bernard Ryman has played well, got an extension, justifiably so. You have a guard that you drafted in the top 6, the highest drafted guard in the last, I don't know, however many years, decades. So that's a weird kind of isolated incident. And then you have a 4th round pick at center, a 3rd round pick at right guard, and then a 4th round pick at right tackle. I promise you, there is no offensive line in the league composed of that sort of draft picks, and they're all in-house draft picks.
Which is crazy.
It's just such a weird group, but they have done a very good job of maximizing it.
Yeah, I have to give them credit for that. And honestly, Quentin Nelson is the one that still blows my mind because I don't think he's 30 yet. And he probably has a Hall of Fame resume right now today. And anytime he's leading that room, they appreciate the leadership there. You can count on him to be still one of the most dominant offensive linemen in the league. But yeah, it is kind of funny that when we talk about needs, and if you just list out where every guy was drafted, you would think that's a big, big need for this team. But no, it's usually, okay, what happens on the offense if, again, Michael Pittman Jr. isn't here next year, and then defensively, it had a lot of help on the other line for sure.
So defense is where I think you could argue they have more needs because there are other position groups. Offense, even if right now you're looking at Pierce as a free agent, you look at Dan Jones as a free agent, I trust that they're going to figure that out to a workable place on that side of the ball. On defense, the defensive line is the spot that, all right, what's going to happen here? You're getting getting a little bit older on the interior, and then beyond Laiatuatu, pretty much every single member of their edge rushing rotation is hitting free agency this spring. JT Talamalu, who was a second-round pick last year, didn't play a ton as a rookie. You assume he's going to be part of that plan. But as you think about the composition of the edge room, is that something that you feel is going to need to be addressed either in free agency or the draft because of how many guys are hitting the market?
Oh, absolutely. I would argue it's both. I want to say Latu last year had 8.5 sacks, 3 interceptions, which was just weird. I don't know if I want to bank on him having another 3 interception season in his career. But you look at the other guys who are free agents that played a ton of snaps last year on the edge: Tyquan Lewis, Samson Ebukam, and Kwesi Adofo-Mensah.
Yeah.
They combined as a group for 9 sacks. And I'm thinking that's just not enough production. Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, I believe, played all 17 games last year, only had maybe 3 sacks. That's not enough for a former first-round pick. So I would argue that, most of those guys, if not all 3, are going to be gone next year. And so you have to, I think, and the fans hate me for saying this, but I'm sorry, you have to probably draft another defensive end. And they hate that. They're like, Chris Ballard can't draft defensive ends. But I'm like, well, it's an avenue to get a good player, so you got to go get him. You can't just not do it. They're like, well, we quit. Just go in free agency. But then I tell them, okay, well, in free agency, and this is what Chris Ballard told us, they want to get younger and faster, but I want to know, like, how realistic, what's the balance there? Because if you get, you know how it is, if you get a defensive end who's a free agent, they're going to have some warts. They're going to be older, or they're going to be if they're younger, they're going to be injury prone. They might not be
or they're going to have no production, like Dio Dengba, who's a former Colt that got paid a ton by the Bears last year.
Exactly. So there's going to be some sort of trepidation there, but how comfortable are you in doing that? So, we hear names like Trey Hendrickson, the relationship he has with Lou Anarumo. Yep. Would you go that route? Is he a young guy? No. Is he coming off injury? Yes. But is he productive when he's healthy? Yes. So those are the things they have to consider. But absolutely, the defensive line, they had so many games last year, even down the stretch when they were banged up and hurt, they just could not get home and finish the game. And they were close in Kansas City. They were close against Seattle. I was thinking to myself, Phillip Rivers might have given them one of the best games of the year at 44 years old. But that defense, again, just couldn't close. And you need closers in this league.
Trey Hendrickson is a name I hadn't really thought about, but if they free up a decent amount of money, if they move on from Michael Pittman, even if you bring back Pierce, they still would probably be able to do something kind of aggressive in the market. And so that hadn't been a name I had thought about, but they could make it work if they wanted to. It would be a little bit out of character. Like what they did in free agency last year with Charvarius Ward is not something they typically do.
Exactly.
So it would be the second straight year they've kind of stepped outside of their normal approach, but that's an interesting one to think about. With Charvarius Ward specifically, what do we think happens there? Because obviously, the injuries and the concussions have piled up to a degree that he's openly talking about retirement and whether that's the right option. Like, do you see him being part of their future in the short term here?
I do think he'll be a part of their future in the short term. I would lean towards him playing football in 2026, but the thing that I've always kind of gone back and forth with him is, okay, how much of a contingency plan should you have built in place? Because unfortunately, it's a violent game. And he did have 3 concussions in about 3 months last year with this team. So how do you factor in the possibility of him getting another one? And he was very candid at the end of the season, during the season. He told us, if I get one more, I might be done. This is it. And, we know what he's been through with the tragedy with his daughter. And he made it very clear, like, I don't want to lose anyone else in my family, including myself. He said, I want to remember everything when I get old. And I don't want to be the guy who, once was. And then he made it very clear, which I loved. It was kind of a flex. Robert, he stands, looks at it. He's like, I made a lot of money.
Yeah.
A lot of money. And I'm like, I know that. And then he also says, I won a Super Bowl. I've started in multiple Super Bowls. I was an undrafted guy. Like, I beat all the odds. But within that, you can still tell that there's an edge. And then talking behind the scenes with some people, it sounds like he is willing to try to give it a go. But again, how much can you trust that if he's already said, if I get one more concussion, I'm done.
They do have Justin Wally on the roster, who they were very, very excited about in training camp last year. And it actually, like, the meme with the small domino and the big domino, Justin Wally tearing his ACL.
Oh my God!
In the summer likely leads to the Sauce Gardner trade, which now makes you tied to Daniel Jones as your quarterback for the next 2 years. And so the Justin Wally injury has irreparably changed the next 5 years of Indianapolis Colts football in a way that I don't think we appreciate quite enough.
Oh, absolutely. And honestly, until you said it out loud like that, I really hadn't connected all the dots. But yes, they were so high on him. I believe he was a 3rd-round pick last year out of Minnesota. And actually, Dane Brugler, I think, had him as like a 6th-rounder. So when they picked him, I was like, what? This is a reach. But then we got to training camp, and Chris Ballard, he was able to give me a little crow to eat, and he was telling me, like, I told you this guy could ball, and he was starting from day one of training camp. And I know people will say, "Well, that's just training camp," but with Lou Anarumo, we know he likes the older players.
And Lou loved him too.
And
they were very excited about Justin Wally last year.
Outside, and he was making plays, joint practices, and he went down to the joint practice in Baltimore against Lamar Jackson and those guys.
I think that was the moment for everybody where they were just like, this dude can play.
Boy, and they went through a boatload of cornerbacks before they got to Sauce Gardner. Because remember, Xavier Howard was here for like a cup of coffee, which was crazy.
The Xavier Howard Rams game will be burned into my mind for the rest of my life. So, but it's even if they were, I think the point is, even if Mooney Ward didn't play, they still have Justin Wally, who they could step into that other outside corner spot, and he would be a contingency plan if Ward were to get hurt. So corner is actually pretty solidified, even considering the Mooney Ward part of this. Safety is the other position where, okay, what's going to happen there? Because Nick Cross is a free agent. I assume he's going to get paid a decent amount of money in free agency. George Odom and Rodney Thomas, both of whom were depth for you over the last couple of years. Those guys are hitting free agency. So that, to me, feels from the outside looking in like another position that they're going to need to address in some way.
Absolutely. And if you ask the fan base here, even if you ask, obviously, the Colts brass who drafted Nick Cross, they traded up to get him, and he's delivered the last 2 years. He's shown that he can be a starting caliber safety in this league. They switched him from free safety to strong safety, closer to the box, and I think that fits him. He actually looks like a linebacker, and he hangs out with him in the locker room as well. He's always the D-line and the linebacker, so I'm like, where are you supposed to be right now? But for Nick Cross, the question I have is, yes, I think that he deserves to get paid, but after you've already injected so much money and resources into your secondary, is it wise to pay another safety, that much money? Because if you think about it, you pay Cam Bynum, you pay Charvarius Ward. I get that Sauce Gardner's on a team-friendly deal, but he's on a big contract. And so, again, how many more guys can you continue to pay in that secondary and at what we would call like non-premium positions? So he's the most interesting one when it comes to the free agents, besides the big names of like, what is his market value? Because we've seen like the safety, market get suppressed in recent years. It can be kind of finicky, but he is a good player, and they would like to have back.
I think it's part of the problem is when you look at it, and we're going to do a show about this next week, but just the positions that you can often find in free agency. There's a reason safety is that position. Teams just aren't really paying safeties, and because there are so many available, that depresses their market even further.
Exactly.
And so it's a spot where if you just need a starting caliber safety in this free agent class, you're probably going to be able to find one, and that is a bad thing for somebody like Nick Cross. It's the exact opposite situation for somebody like Alec Pierce, where if it's not Alec Pierce, it's Romeo Doubs, and even Romeo Doubs is a better player than the guys who are available at free agency in last year's class at receiver.
Exactly.
So it's the way that positions are affected by the market is absolutely something that's worth considering. Anything else from this team that you have at front of mind as we sit here on the eve of free agency and the draft that you feel like still needs to be figured out?
I think not necessarily figured out, but maybe just answered is the vision for Anthony Richardson and literally his vision. I know we talked to him at the end of the season and people were like, okay, well, he's practicing. Why isn't he playing? He could not see fully. And I don't think people, and I love you all for being as passionate you are as fans, but I'm like, do you know how hard it is to play football if you can't see fully? And I mean, you need all of it, the peripherals, everything like that. It isn't just, making a couple throws. So we were asking about the eye because it's his right eye. And honestly, Robert, seeing him after the incident, he's cut underneath his right eye. And it makes me think like, okay, with all this stuff that happened and and to explain the process, like he was in the locker room, he's warming up. I think he attached a band to something in the locker room, and that thing broke. Whatever it was, metal, plastic, it hit him in the face really hard. So imagine getting the fastball to the face at 90 miles an hour. And when you look at where it hit him, in my mind, I'm thankful that he can still see at all out of his right eye. And he couldn't, and the team could not say definitively whether the vision would come back. They're optimistic that it will, but I mean, I'm optimistic about a lot of things in life, and sometimes it doesn't work out like that. So where does that stand? And then if he does have the full vision or not, how does that affect him staying in Indianapolis, moving on to another team? If you're a team that wants to take a flyer on Anthony Richardson, yeah, you can deal with maybe the other injury stuff, but the eye is something like you got to be able to see for me to even take a chance on you. So where does that stand going into 2026?
Lot of things to weigh with where the Colts are right now on the edge of a crucial season for everybody involved. James Boyd, always great to chat with you, my friend. Great to see you. We'll do it again very soon.
Sounds good, man. Appreciate you.
All right, guys, that's all we got for today. Thank you to Jesse. Thank you to Alec. Thank you to James for their time. We will be back with one more of these tomorrow. I couldn't even for the life of me tell you which 3 teams we're going to hit because I do not remember. We'll have our third and final show, the most interesting teams of the offseason. And then me, Dave, and Derrik will be back with you on Friday as we recap the week that was in Indianapolis and all of the scuttlebutt that we have been hearing.
Bengals, Ravens, Eagles.
Bengals, Ravens, Eagles. Beller is the keeper of the schedule. He knows what's happening here. Bengals, Ravens, Eagles going to be coming to you guys tomorrow. For now, that is all we've got from Indy. Appreciate you guys listening. We'll talk to you very soon. Thanks for watching. Follow The Athletic Football Show wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to subscribe on YouTube.